Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if we judge artificial intelligence more harshly than we judge each other? This new study dives deep into that question. So imagine you see a robot and a human do the exact same thing, especially something that has moral consequences. Would you judge the robot the same way you judge the human? It seems like a simple question, but it is super important as AI becomes a bigger part of our lives. Researchers at the University of Exeter wondered about this and decided to gather all the science they could find to figure it out. They looked at 50 studies that compared how people reacted to decisions made by humans versus AI. What they found is pretty interesting. Think about that scene from a movie where a detective is chasing a robot, but the robot is actually doing something good. Why do we sometimes react differently to AI, even when it acts just like a person? The researchers say understanding this is key to making sure AI can be used ethically in situations where it matters. They bring up examples like AI chatbots making mistakes, which can make people wary. They then introduced two ideas. One is that maybe AI is just special, and we have different rules for it, like how we treat pets differently than people. The other idea, the nothing special about AI hypothesis, suggests we process AI much like we do humans. This study aimed to see which of these ideas holds more weight. To start, they defined some key terms to make sure everyone was on the same page. A moral agent, for example, is something that makes a decision that affects a situation with moral implications. Moral judgment, on the other hand, is our evaluation of that decision. They needed clear definitions to make sense of all the different studies. The researchers focused specifically on judging the decisions made by AI versus humans, rather than just general impressions. This way, they could see if differences in judgment came from the type of agent involved, or from the details of the decision itself. By comparing matched decisions, they could better pinpoint where any differences in how we judge AI and humans might come from. They explored how different aspects of a moral decision might influence our judgments. For example, they looked at moral domains like harm versus fairness, and the intention behind a decision. They noted that for human decisions, the intention matters a lot. If a bad outcome was directly intended, we judge it more harshly than if it was an unintended side effect. But when it comes to AI, this seems to be different. Sometimes people don't penalize AI for intended bad effects as much as they do humans. This difference in how intention is perceived could be a big clue. They also considered features of the agent itself. For instance, people tend to give AI less credit for responsibility compared to humans. And critically, they looked at perceived mental capacity, which includes things like agency and experience. The idea is that if we think an AI has less mental capacity, we might judge its decisions more harshly. They even considered how visually human, like an AI, looks, as this can influence our perceptions. So, after all this background, the researchers conducted their meta-analysis. They systematically reviewed studies that directly compared people's moral judgments of AI decisions versus human decisions in similar situations. They wanted to see if there was an overall pattern, and if so, what factors might explain it. They included 26 articles, which broke down into 53 independent studies. These studies involved a total of over 23,000 participants. To make sure their work was solid, they pre-registered their entire plan online. This means they laid out exactly what they were going to do before they even started analyzing the data, which is a great way to prevent bias. They searched for studies in major databases like PubMed and Web of Science, and also used an AI-powered tool called Elicit. They used a very structured process to select which studies to include. Imagine a big funnel, tons of articles go in the top, but only the most relevant ones make it through to the end. They screened abstracts, then read full articles, and had strict rules for what made a study count. The key was that studies had to compare moral judgments of human agents' decisions to AI agents' decisions. The main rule was that the studies had to measure people's moral judgments specifically about the permissibility of a decision, and directly compare human versus AI agents. They wanted to avoid studies that just asked people if they liked AI or if they thought AI made good decisions in general. It had to be about the moral rightness or wrongness of specific actions within a moral dilemma. The researchers then took the data from all the selected studies and calculated effect sizes. Think of an effect size as a standardized way to measure how big a difference is between groups. They coded it so that a positive number meant AI was judged more leniently than humans, and a negative number meant AI was judged more harshly. Now, sometimes in science, a few studies can have really extreme results that might skew the overall picture. The researchers found some of these outliers' results that were way out of line with the others. They carefully examined these to see if they were errors or just unusual findings. After a thorough review, they decided to create a trimmed dataset where these highly influential outliers were removed. This is a common practice to get a clearer idea of the general trend. Because many studies grouped participants together and some studies had multiple measurements, the researchers used a complex statistical model called a three-level meta-analytic design. This helps account for the fact that some of the data isn't completely independent. It's like making sure you don't count the same person's opinion multiple times just because they answered a few questions. They also checked for something called publication bias. This is the tendency for studies with significant or positive results to be published more often than studies with null or negative results. They used special statistical tests and visual tools called funnel plots to see if there was evidence of this bias. Luckily, after they trimmed out the extreme outliers, their publication bias test showed fewer signs of this problem. After all this preparation, they ran their main analysis on the trimmed dataset. They found that overall, AI agents' moral decisions were judged as less morally permissible than equivalent human decisions. The effect size here was a small negative number, meaning a slight harshness towards AI. This next figure, the forest plot, visually shows the individual study results. You can see the dots representing each study's finding, and the lines showing the range of uncertainty. The overall average, the big line at the bottom, shows that small but consistent difference where AI was judged a bit more harshly. But the story doesn't end there. They then looked at different factors called moderators that might explain why there were differences or why some studies showed bigger differences than others. They first looked at the type of moral domain. They found that when the decision involved harm, AI was judged harsher, but for non-harm situations, there wasn't a significant difference. Then they looked at intention. Remember how we talked about intended bad effects versus side effects? This turned out to be a really important factor. When the bad outcome was a side effect, something not directly intended AI was judged harsher. But when the bad outcome was a means to an end, meaning it was directly intended, the difference between judging AI and humans nearly disappeared. This is a big clue. It suggests that for AI, we might focus less on intention and more on the outcome itself compared to how we judge humans. They also looked at whether the agent chose to act or not act. They found that when AI chose not to act, it was judged harsher than when humans didn't act. Again, this suggests a subtle difference in how we perceive AI actions versus inactions. Interestingly, when they looked at how much responsibility people assigned to an agent, it didn't seem to change the difference in how AI and humans were judged. This suggests that our judgments aren't simply tied to how much blame we think an AI deserves in the same way we assign blame to humans. Now, this next one is a big deal. PMC stands for Perceived Mental Capacity. This is what people think about an AI's ability to think and feel, like its agency and experience. They found that PMC significantly changed how we judge AI versus humans. When people perceived AI's mental capacity to be closer to a human's, the difference in judgment shrunk. In other words, if we believe an AI is mentally capable like a human, we judge its decisions more similarly to how we judge human decisions. This strongly supports the idea that our judgments are influenced by our assumptions about AI's inner world. They also looked at perceived moral agency, which is a part of mental capacity focused on things like self-control and thought. While PMA was important, it didn't moderate the differences in judgment as much as PMC did. This suggests that the broader sense of mental capacity, including experience, plays a larger role in shaping our moral judgments of AI. They also explored if simply implying that an AI was intelligent changed judgments. When intelligence wasn't explicitly implied, AI was judged harsher. This makes sense. If we don't think of AI as intelligent, we might default to harsher judgments. But when intelligence was implied, the difference is lessened. This again points to our assumptions about AI's capabilities influencing our moral evaluations. They even broke down the types of AI, like AI systems versus robots, and then mechanical versus humanoid robots. While there were some hints of differences, overall this categorization didn't significantly change the pattern of judgment differences between AI and humans. This suggests that the specific form of the AI might be less important than our general perception of its capabilities. A really interesting discovery was how the wording of the question itself affected judgments. Using words like acceptable, justifiable, moral, permissible, or unethical led to significant differences between how humans and AI were judged. However, the effect for words like appropriate, good, right, and wrong did not show significant differences. This implies that the subtle nuances of language we use when asking about moral judgments can influence the outcome. They also assessed the quality of the studies included. While research quality didn't moderate the overall finding, meaning high-quality studies didn't consistently show bigger or smaller differences, they did notice that many studies in the literature had lower research quality. This means there might be a lot of noise in the current research, making it harder to get a completely clear picture. So, what is the big takeaway from all this? The study found that overall, people do judge AI decisions slightly more harshly than human decisions. However, when they used a statistical test to see if this difference was actually meaningful or just a small fluke, they found that the difference was negligible. This leans towards the nothing special about AI idea, meaning when we account for all the details, we don't necessarily treat AI as a fundamentally different kind of moral being. But the nuances are where it gets really interesting. The intention behind a decision seemed to matter. When AI's actions resulted in bad side effects, they were judged more harshly. But when those bad effects were intended, the difference between judging AI and humans almost vanished. This suggests we might be focusing more on the outcome for AI and less on the intention compared to humans. The researchers found that perceived mental capacity, or PMC, was a key factor. When people saw AI as having mental capacity similar to humans, their judgments of AI became more forgiving. This strongly suggests that our assumptions about AI's mind play a huge role in how we judge its moral decisions. They also highlighted that the way questions are worded can really change things, and that many studies suffer from methodological quirks. For example, the quality of the research matters, and we need more studies that consider both participants and the specific stimuli used. The authors are upfront about the limitations. One person did most of the work, which could introduce bias. Also, some studies might have been missed, and incomplete reporting in other studies made coding difficult. So, is AI special? The evidence here suggests not necessarily. While we might judge AI slightly harsher overall, this difference is small and not consistently meaningful. What seems to drive these differences are our assumptions about AI's mental capacity and how clearly the intention behind its actions is communicated. The study strongly suggests that if we can be made to perceive AI as more mentally capable, we will judge its moral decisions more like we judge human decisions. It's less about AI being inherently different and more about our perceptions of AI. This is great news for AI developers, as it means that by designing AI that better reflects human-like understanding or clearly communicates its processes, we can potentially bridge the gap in moral judgment. So, what do I think? This is a really thorough and important study. By bringing together so many different pieces of research, they've given us a much clearer picture of how we judge AI. The finding that perceived mental capacity is so key is fascinating. It means we're not just seeing a robot, we're trying to understand its mind, even if it is artificial. The fact that intention matters less for AI in some cases is also a big clue that we process information differently. When it comes to machines, the limitations they mention, like the varied quality of studies and the impact of wording, are also crucial. It means we need more rigorous research going forward, especially studies that look at both participants and stimuli as random factors. As they mentioned, this will help us get more precise answers and build AI that we can better trust and integrate into our lives. The future research needs to focus on manipulating our perception of AI's mental capacity and clarifying intent, to see if we can truly equalize judgments. What are your thoughts on this? Do you find yourself judging AI decisions differently than human ones? Let me know in the comments below, and if you found this breakdown helpful, please hit that like button, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.